President Trump is sticking with his denial of the alleged plot that Russians paid bounties to Taliban-linked fighters to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan. In an interview yesterday, the president called it a, quote, hoax, and says that Russia and the Taliban, and in fact, Russia and the Taliban have also refuted these reports in line with what the president is saying. CBS News has learned that the intelligence did, in fact, make it into the president's briefing, although agencies have deferred on the credibility of the alleged plot. Now, this comes as a group of top Congress members, known collectively as the Gang of Eight, are expected to be briefed today. Catherine Herridge has been following these developments, and she joins us now with the very latest from Washington. So, Catherine, what is explain the role of this briefing and the role the Gang of Eight plays in intelligence matters?
Well, the Gang of Eight is the senior leadership of both parties in the House and the Senate, as well as the chairman and ranking member of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. And under something called Title 50, it is required that they are briefed on clandestine and covert activities, as well as immediate national security matters. So that's how the Gang of Eight fits into the briefing that's going to happen today. Now, what's also important is they're going to be briefed by what's called principals. So that's the CIA director, Gina Haspel, and then the head of the National Security Agency, Paul Nakasone. And the reason they matter is because they represent two different types of intelligence streams that are fundamental to understanding whether there was a plot by Russian intelligence to pay the Taliban to attack U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Gina Haspel represents what they call HUMINT, so that's human spying, interrogations. Based on my reporting, this is where the intelligence stream initiated in Afghanistan. And then the other side of the house is the NSA, and that's signals intelligence. So that's things like phone calls, emails, text messages, as well as electronic surveillance. And that is where we believe, based on our reporting here at CBS News, that there is this conflict or divide over the credibility of this information.
Okay, can we dig a little bit deeper into that and what some of your sources within the intelligence community are saying? What do they agree on and what do they disagree on? I don't know if you could sort of go into that level of detail, but what do we know?
Sure, Anne-Marie. So based on my reporting, talking to specifically military intelligence sources, this intelligence originated and was developed by the CIA, and it came out of interrogations in Afghanistan. What's not clear to me yet in my reporting is whether we, the U.S., did these interrogations or whether the interrogations were handled by one of our allied services. And that's important because those interrogations are done differently than how the U.S. would do the interrogations. What I also know through my reporting is that there was an effort to run down that information to develop what's called a targeting package. And what that means in military speak is that if you get threat information, you try and determine the source, so the attribution and the credibility, and then see whether you can target the source of that information. So in other words, target the adversary. I was told there wasn't sufficient intelligence to build a targeting package. Then on the NSA side, they're looking at a completely different wheelhouse of information. This is the signals information. And something was developed called an intelligence collection report, which is a fancy way of saying how reliable is this information. And the NSA dissented in that report, and I was actually able to get a quote from the report, and it states, NSA assesses reporting does not match well-established and verifiable Taliban and Haqqani practices. So the Taliban, you know that group, and Haqqani is another terrorist group in the region. So what they're saying is, based on the intel, doesn't match their MO from what we've seen in previous threat situations. And then it also indicated that there was not enough information to really corroborate it and run it down. So that's sort of how it divides in terms of these two buckets of information.
Catherine, we have also seen that our sources overseas have confirmed the bounties. So what more do we know about that?
Well, we have a senior Afghan official here at CBS News telling us that they are aware of information that the Russian military intelligence was paying bounties to target U.S. forces. The question you have to have with that information is how reliable are the Taliban's claims And are they syncing up with these other pools of information that we've been able to develop independently here in the United States? And the reason I would draw a special attention to the NSA intelligence, and this in many ways is considered one of the gold standards within intelligence, is because you're listening to people and you're reading what they're saying when they don't know you're actually looking. So they're more candid in a lot of ways. So what the NSA, based on my reporting, is saying, when we look at this collection that we have, it's not syncing up with these claims that we're getting from individuals on the ground. But we don't have the full context, and that's why I'm always a little cautious here. We don't have the full context of the intelligence, and we don't have the full context as to why there was this disconnect or dissent between these two primary agencies.
So the other component of this story is about the president and what he knew and when. And the way the president overall is briefed when it comes to these sort of issues. Does he read? Does he not read? And is this atypical, or, how did other presidents handle this? So can you give us a sense of what we know about how the president receives this sort of information when it comes to threats to the United States, and how it differs or is the same as other presidents?
So there's something called the PDB, which is the President's Daily Brief. This is a highly classified document, and they describe it as being an all-source document. That means that it's taking intelligence streams from across the 16 U.S. intelligence agencies to create the best mosaic, so the best picture based on intelligence from multiple and different sources. So the PDB has two components. One is a written component, and the other is this verbal briefing. Based on my reporting, this president gets an in-person briefing, usually by a CIA briefer, 3 times a week. The PDB, the written PDB, is delivered basically every day, and it takes about 90 minutes to read. So you don't have a situation where the briefer's sitting in there and they've got 45 minutes and they're going line by line through the PDB. They're picking out what they think is, number one, the most credible information, the most corroborated information, and the information that's really the most time-sensitive information in terms of the policy decisions the president has to make. And he's not the only one who gets access to this intelligence report. It's broader than that. But just to back up, he's got to make information almost in real time, if you will. And what the NSA, the National Security Advisor at the White House, said is that it was a career intelligence person, so the CIA briefer, who made the call not to verbally tell the president about this alleged bounty by the Russians targeting U.S. forces because they believed that it was not corroborated, didn't cross that threshold. So the tough thing here is that these are all judgment calls that people are making in the moment, right? So I think that you have to see the data points that are available to us and make up your own mind whether you think the president ought to be reading the PDB every day in full, or one of his closest advisors should be reading it every day and looking for this kind of information that would obviously go to the safety of forces overseas. But on just one final point there, it's no small thing the defense secretary went on the record and said essentially, we've upped our force protection in the region, but we still consider this information uncorroborated. And that is not unusual at all in my experience. You get a piece of threat information, you think it may impact your forces in a specific region, so you up your force protection while you're in the process of trying to verify it.
So that actually, I didn't hear all that you said, Catherine, but that's I had a follow-up to that point that you just made, because what the White House initially said was that the reason that the president didn't know anything about it, or the reason that the president wasn't briefed about it verbally, is because there were some questions from the intelligence agencies as to whether or not this threat was credible. But then my question was, and again, I don't have the sources, I'm just sort of looking at this the way I think most ordinary Americans are, which is the president of the United States must receive all sorts of information, and they come from different perspectives and they come from different different intelligence operatives, and it's up to the President of the United States in his role as the Commander-in-Chief to decide what to do with this information.
Right.
Whether it's credible or not is something that a Commander-in-Chief can get input from the various Joint Chiefs and the various intelligence heads that troop to his office every single day. And so does it make sense that the White House would say, well, no, the President didn't, take a look at this because it wasn't deemed credible or it wasn't deemed accurate, and so they didn't bother him with it?
Based on my experience, and I've been reporting in this area for 2 decades, is that it's not an either or a zero-sum game. You can have intelligence that is uncorroborated and unverified about a threat to U.S. forces in a region, and you can take steps to share it with your allies, which is what happened here, and you can take steps to improve your force protection while you're in the process of running down the source of that information and whether it's credible. And then on the other side, you have the executive branch, and a briefer, based on what the National Security Advisor said, made a call not to verbally tell the president about it because they didn't feel it had been sufficiently verified or corroborated. So this is a scenario, I hope I simplified it as well as I could, but it's a scenario where actually both things can be true. You have uncorroborated information, and you take active steps based on that information so that you can have what amounts to almost an insurance policy. So you're ready if it turns out to be true and there is an imminent threat to your forces in the region. And then at the same time, because it hasn't been sufficiently verified, it doesn't reach the president and the vice president. And that is what I love about intelligence, is that it really is like playing multi-dimensional chess, right, on several levels. And you've always got to be making the move that, number one, puts the security of your people on the ground sort of at the top of the list. And then number two, you have to use all of the assets at your disposal. And we have a lot of assets at our disposal in the U.S. intelligence community to understand the significance of that information, whether it's reliable, whether it's credible, or it's a red herring. It's disinformation. It is designed to get us looking one way while the target is moving towards us from the other direction.
Man, and what we love about talking to you, Catherine, is you take multi-dimensional chess and
I do my
explain
best
it in a way that even Vlad and I can understand. And we
I
are
wouldn't
really
say
and
that.
truly grateful to have you.